I'll try to make this short, even though I like to ramble a lot. Anyway, left side obviously Lightroom, right side Capture One Pro. Capture One Pro has not imported this photo. It's just pointing to where the photo is on my disk. However, you can see that obviously there are some differences in how the raw file is rendered by both of these applications. With Capture One, the reds are deeper, they look more, it overall has a more saturated look to it. It's got a little more punch to it, contrast to it from the jump, which is, I know a lot of people have said that they don't like this because it's not true to the image, but then again, I don't know that what Lightroom represents is true to the image either. Sure, it looks flatter, but flatter doesn't always necessarily mean more true to. I mean, it's representing what light was there, and if Capture One is adding anything, I'll be honest with you, I'm not upset at what it's adding. It never overdoes anything. If anything, I can say that it leaves less work to be done. I already like the image out of Capture One versus Lightroom just a little bit more because it adds a little bit more depth to the color. So, I don't have to bake it as much, which, whatever, personal preference, all personal preference. That out of the way, let me go over some of the subtle and maybe not so subtle differences between the two applications. I've hidden panels from both of them because I just want it to look clean. And I actually just downloaded the Lightroom trial again because I no longer use Lightroom, so I'm not paying for it, so I don't have it, etc. Let's start off with, aside from the color or whatever differences there are in image quality from the jump, let's take a look at how things are broken down in terms of modules. So in Lightroom, you're very familiar with library, develop, and all the rest, right? I've chosen this photo so I don't have to go searching for. I've hidden the tools module in Capture One, which technically is the equivalent to the panels here, the modules here. So let me bring the tools back here. Command T brings that back. And I can actually place the tools on the left side if I wanted, but I wanted to emulate Lightroom as closely as I could for your sake, so that you'd see how similar they really are. Let me bring the tools back here permanently, if I can. There we go. And let's go into the develop module here because we've already chosen the photo. Now, as you can see, I have a develop module somewhat here, right? This is basically the develop module. This is the module that shows me the basic adjustments. This here is the folder hierarchy menu, which is pretty much equivalent to the library menu. The biggest difference here now is that Lightroom works with a catalog session, and here in, I shouldn't call it a session, it works with catalogs, and then it does also break things down into a folder hierarchy depending on how you have it set up. And then in Capture One, let me get rid of that. In Capture One, it's really just pointing to where the files are, which is very akin to whatchamacallit, Bridge, right? If you're working with ACR and Bridge in Photoshop. And I like that better because it wastes less space. A lot less space. It doesn't waste any space. It just points to the files. I don't have to import anything. I can basically open a new what's called session. You can see it up here. It says untitled session because technically when I'm not doing a job and I don't need to title a session like Greg and June's wedding, it doesn't matter. I just can look up whatever stuff I want. Right now I'm looking here, and if I wanted my browser, whoops, wrong program. If I wanted my browser, here's my browser for Capture One. Let me go back here and undo that, and let me unzoom that, and let me get back to the photo, which is around here somewhere. There it is. I just passed it. Come on, Lightroom, work with me. There we go, not against me. God, Lightroom is still freaking so slow. Okay, so wait, can I get rid of that? What part was that? Wasn't that Command T to get rid of this thing? Oh God, this thing is so annoying. Whatever, I don't care. Anyway, so files, filters, keywords, sorting, rating, blah, 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 blah. I can also collapse it. And then I have my develop persona or module, whatever you want to call it. Now the interesting thing here is that along the top, it's not just basic stuff. It's also color editing, right? And then it's also local adjustments. And then there's my sharpening. Now if I wanted to, what's really cool about this program is I could, if I wanted to, in the what you'd call develop module, right click and say add tool and just put sharpening right in there. Right? So wherever you want it in your workflow, you can have it. I could make this panel look very close to this panel. Obviously not exactly, because there are some things like, let's say in the exposure panel here, under tone, you have exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks, but highlights and shadows are relegated to a totally different little, like a separate module called high dynamic range in here, and I can actually move that wherever I want to. So speaking of dynamic, it is really dynamic. It's very customizable. But if I want to, I can make this as close to this as possible. So you've got white balance. You've got the histogram here, right? And let's see what's under white balance. Your tone, exposure, contrast, highlights. So we'll start with, you know what? Actually, it's probably better to start with highlights and shadows, and then go to your exposure and contrast, because logically speaking, your exposure won't blow out highlights if the exposure is done properly in terms of the algorithm. I've seen some applications that tend to blow highlights by using the exposure adjustments, which is kind of crappy, but this program doesn't do that. So I can put my highlights and shadows first, and then my exposure, then my clarity and structure, and then I also have levels, which Lightroom doesn't have, which is really nice. All right, just give it a little more punch there, and I can bring down my blacks with it, just to give it even more tonal dynamic range. Shoot, I didn't even do anything, and I think this photo looks great already just by using levels. I haven't even touched curves yet, which I don't really even need to, but I'll do it anyway. I'll give it a nice little S curve. That's a little too much, a little too baked, but well, no, it's all right, whatever. So, man, my photo is like almost done, to be honest with you. It just needs a little bit of straightening, and I'm like almost good to go. Maybe a little sharpening, which is done technically. Let me turn off the sharpening, and we'll look at that. By the way, excuse the audio quality. I'm using headphones with a so-so kind of mic on it, and I'm actually holding that mic with my left hand. So sharpening works really well. You can, if you look at the window pane, you can see it in action. It's really, really, it can be very subtle, but it works really well. And I'm using very low values in terms of radius, and using a pretty decent threshold, and I don't have to use any halo suppression because it's not creating any halos, and it already looks great. So when you say you don't understand how to use it, I'm just not sure if you've actually tried to spend any time with it, because obviously, shoot, I haven't even used the exposure or contrast or brightness and saturation here, and it looks fantastic. If I wanted to add more saturation, sure I could. That looks terrible. And I found with Capture One, small increments go a very long way. And on something like this, I'd rather use structure versus clarity because it's a little more natural. Clarity will just add a little too much in terms of noise. I mean, I can do it and it won't be terrible, but I'm not a big fan of structure unless it's something very specific, but let's see what that looks like up close. Yeah, it's a little too much for me, so I'm going to dial that clarity back down to 0. And also I can just use local adjustments for clarity just on the building if I wanted to. And I don't really even need that much structure. So whatever, I'll just bring it down there. So as you can see, right, so color correction here, really, really good stuff. I love when you're able to just work with colors individually, you know, like the reds and the green. Let's see what this does with the reds. It's probably more orange, so let's try the oranges. Yeah, there we go. So the orange will bring down the luminance and we'll bring up the saturation. And then the yellows, let's see if there's anything there. A little bit, but not much. And let's bring up the reds for saturation. Yeah, a little bit. And let's try changing the hue of the orange to be a little more red and match that of on one. Yeah, well, whatever. I could probably spend some time and work on this to make it look closer to what this is right out of the gate, but you're never going to get them to be exactly the same because they use different algorithms. I primarily use Fuji cameras, and I found that it works so much better than Lightroom for it, which is why I gave it up. So I don't know. I don't really have much else to show you. I mean, I can show you other stuff like the local tools up on here, like cropping and gradient masks and straightening. Let me show you the straightening really quick. There's a few tools in here if you double tap and hold, but I'm going to just straighten this all. Let's see, start here and then just drag it out here. There we go. Straighten that for me a little bit. You can also do that manually if it's not, you know, working the way you think it should. And I don't know. There's a lot of other stuff I can show you, but here's, by the way, sorry, the color corrections, color balance tools. There's so much to do. There's so much here in Capture One that just is not available in Lightroom that it can seem kind of daunting, but you don't even really need to use these tools. Personally, sure, I might dial down these reds a little bit because I think I'd prefer them to be a little more orange. So let's do that. I'm just going to go into, let's see what basic does. So let me use the color selector, choose that, and let's bring the hue back to orange. See, there we go. Alright, and let's dial down the saturation a bit. There we go. That's a lot more natural looking, without all that saturation, without all the red. And it was that easy. It's, I don't know, to me it's so much better than, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Lightroom for other aspects. Like I really dig the radial tool. I love that tool. That's a great tool, and I think it's gradient tool is also a lot more precise than that of Capture One. It's not terrible in Capture One, but it's really more precise. Let me show you. So here's the gradient mask, that's what they call it. And if I wanted, let's say I wanted the sky to be lightened or what have you, instead of starting from the top and dragging down, which you could do, I would actually just choose a point closest to where I wanted it to be strongest and then to gradually fade out, right? And then just end it right about there, right? Now if you wanted to see where that was, you would say always display mask. Right, and if I wanted it to be further down, I would just do that. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's change that. So, yeah, there we go. And honestly, yeah, I do think that Lightroom has a more efficient gradient tool. I really do. I find this gradient tool to be a bit annoying, to be honest with you. But it works. I mean, once you kind of get the hang of it, it works. So if I just wanted to lighten things up, then I go into my local adjustments, and then I can make my exposure changes or my brightness, blah, 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 whatever you wanted to do there. So as you see, it's functional. It works. It works well enough. I just think that Lightroom's is more precise. The other thing that Lightroom has, which is really awesome, is that let me get back in here. Let me undo these. I love. Let me go back to. Sometimes I forget how this works. Where is it? Where is that tool? Is it under detail? It's been a while since I've used Lightroom, so you'll have to excuse me. Where is it? Dehaze. I really like the dehaze. The dehaze is awesome. In fact, by using dehaze, I think I got it really close to where Capture One started out, which is really interesting. Let's see. Let me see. So I'm going to go to Image, and no, sorry, it's Adjustments, and let me do a. Is it Adjustments? Now I'm messing myself up. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing here. So now Capture One. So let me go back to Adjustments, and then to Reset, Command R. I forgot that. So here's where Capture One started off. Interesting. Huh. Did I make changes here? So now I feel like Lightroom. Oh, I did. I made changes to this. There we go. I totally forgot that I did that. Let's do that. Okay, so right. Okay, so there we are back to reset, and I guess I could have just hit reset on this too in the history. It's been a while, like I said. But anyway, so starting off, Capture One is a little bit more saturated, I guess, right? But if we go down to dehaze, it looks like it wouldn't take much. Oh, wrong way. It looks like it wouldn't take much to... Here, that's about the level. The skies look like they're at about the same level. The color differences are still there, but now there's a little less work to do with Lightroom, but that's probably not how you would go about making adjustments anyway, so maybe I take that back. But dehaze really did liven things up, like make things pop when I made after I made those color adjustments. So I feel like I'm rambling now. I don't know if I should have taken you through an entire workflow as far as like how I would have adjusted this image, because to be honest, I feel like it's common sense, and I feel like it's self-explanatory. So if it's not, let me know, or let me know what you want to see. If you want me to work on like a portrait image or a landscape image or whatever kind of photo you like to work on, or if you want to send me, actually that might be the best thing, is if you want to send me a photo that you have recently taken that you want to work on and you'd like to see how I would work on it within Capture One, feel free to do that. Otherwise, hope you have a good one, and if you have any questions, let me know. Cheers.